Hey, I'm so glad that you're taking the time to listen to this podcast. If, however, you're under age 13, now is the time to hit pause and get your parents to come listen to this and let you know if this is a podcast that they think is a good thing for you to be listening to. So hit pause now if you are under age 13. Hey, if you're listening to this podcast, this I think is a really valuable podcast for any age. We try to speak in a way that I believe is appropriate for any age. However, we're going to be talking about some more serious topics, particularly pornography and how that's impacted the life of one of our youth leaders and how they walked with God through that. And as a parent, making a decision of when you start to speak on this is a really, really big deal. One piece of advice I think is really wise. Obviously, I'm not the parent of your kid, and you are. But one piece of advice I've heard that's really wise is that we need to start telling the narrative of sexuality before our kids start hearing it from elsewhere. And in Canada, by the time your kid is a teenager, they're probably already aware of sexuality from pornography and starting to become aware of a lot of things that don't really reflect God's view of our sexuality and devalue it and twist it. And so I really encourage you as a parent, whether you use this podcast as a tool in that or not, to consider how am I going to start communicating to my kid what God actually created our sexuality for, the value that that carries. And by all means, please listen to this podcast also. I think it's really valuable. It's a story that I relate to in my own ways. And yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges in our culture today that you have the opportunity to speak into and guide your children well, that they would come to know and follow God in every single part of their life. All right, let's jump into the podcast.
Hey guys, I'm so glad that you're joining us on the Hope Youth Podcast. This is a podcast that we really try to just focus on interviewing different people from our church community on their life, their faith, and their experiences as a youth. This podcast in particular is going to be a pretty long, heavy one. I'm really looking forward to it because I think it's going to be really valuable. But yeah, brace yourselves. It's going to get real. That being said, I'd like to introduce our guest today, is Hillary Reel. And I was coming up with some interesting facts about her that you may or may not know. One is that she's a twin, and it's important to note that she's not identical. She has a twin brother who does not look anywhere as cool as she does. I'm assuming that part. I've never actually met him, which is sad. She grew up on an island, and this was a small island with 12 other people on it. And finally, she just told me that she can touch her nose with her tongue, which I don't really know. Yeah, I just don't know how to feel about that. But that has been shared.
Yeah.
And Hillary is going to introduce our co-host today.
Well, first, are you going to show us that you can touch
Yes,
the nose? Okay.
I can show you that for sure.
Okay, now we know that it was truthful.
You know, it's
Legit.
true.
You're not just flexing yourself.
That's my little party trick that I show every now and then. Yeah. So, the co-host is Morgan, and I kind of thought that it would be a good idea to have her on here because she is familiar with my testimony, and in the last few years, she's been somebody that I can really trust and talk to and share my struggles with, and she knows a lot about my story and how it relates to what we're talking about today. So it's just really nice for me to have her here.
I'm really glad to be here too.
Yeah.
I'm here for you.
Also, if you hear like
Thanks.
weird sniffles or anything in the background, we have a fourth person on this podcast, our dog Start, who knows what she's gonna do.
Yeah.
She's a dog.
Makes weird noises.
Yeah. We're gonna start off with some really serious, hard questions.
Yeah.
The first question is, what are your top 3 comfort items during this whole COVID-19 quarantine life thing?
Yeah. Well, the first one is easy. It's a cozy blanket, and I actually have my Cozy Canucks blanket with me right now. And I have it with me like all the time, and I have like carried it with me all over the place, and it's brought me much comfort. The second one would probably be a bag of chips or like some kind of junk food, maybe a chocolate bar. I'm really into mini eggs right now, and those are helping me get through this time a lot. And then the third thing is probably like someone that I can play board games or video games with because I'm super bored and I just want to pass the time and have fun, while still being like safe distance and not spreading germs. So those are my top three things.
Nice. And if people know you very much, they know that you've spent a lot of time at camps living. The island you were living on was a camp, as I understand.
Yeah.
And part of camps, having never been to a camp, is
Which is wrong, but
Yeah.
yeah. I've been shamed for my poor childhood. Traumatized, honestly.
Mm.
No, it's okay, parents. I'll live. But what was your camp name?
So one of the camps that I've been to has camp names, and it's very strict. You cannot call the staff members by their real name. You have to call them by their camp name. And my camp name was Chili Bean, which is kind of weird. And I get asked a lot by the little boys at camp if it's because I fart all the time. And not the case. It's just a random nickname that my dad gave me when I was a kid, and it has stuck. And I kind of love it. So
That's so sweet.
yeah.
So sweet. And I already know that you have bailed on Surrey for holding up.
Yeah.
Where have you headed off to?
So I packed my bags and escaped to the small little town of Princeton, which is where my parents live, and there's free food and a backyard that I can enjoy, which is much nicer and much more than I got in Surrey. And it's been really nice so far. It's been beautiful weather, and I get to hang out with my family, and yeah, it's been great.
That's really nice. All right, to actually get into some of the more serious questions, typically on this podcast, as we're preparing for it, we kind of go, what are some interesting experiences in your life, and particularly your youth, that may have shaped you, that are valuable for people to hear that they haven't necessarily heard yet? And you shared with us something that's pretty deep and pretty vulnerable, and we really appreciate that. Yeah, but I figured pass it off to you, kind of let you open up what that is.
Yeah, basically, when we got together to kind of talk about the podcast, and we threw some ideas around, and what happened was Morgan had like mentioned that there might be something that's specific that we could talk about, and as soon as Michael told me that, I was like, okay, I know what that is. And we
I left it vague though.
Yes, you did. Thank you. But we agreed that it was important, and I hope that it is valuable for the people who listen and watch, because I know that it affects a lot of people just in general. So basically the topic for our podcast today is my testimony and how it pertains to my struggles with pornography, and what God has done in my life through that, and yeah, how I've struggled with it, how I continue to struggle with it, that kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'd like to say I'm smiling because I'm proud of Hillary, and
Thank you.
I know that the story goes somewhere positive. So I'm not smiling because I'm like, yeah, I'm glad Hillary, going through something like this. But
yeah,
there's
and I'm smiling because I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a thing you need to open up with, and I really value it just because it's something that affects youth and honestly many people in the church quite a bit. Yeah, it's not a new topic to us, but it's something that we tend to avoid at best. But I really do believe it's really valuable to open up. You share that view, and so I guess I'll kind of just say, hey, can you tell us a bit of the story of how this has played out in your life?
Yeah. I guess I think the most important thing to know is that my parents are Christians, and I grew up in a Christian home, and a very loving home, which has been like a refuge for me all my life. But when I was I was pretty young. I was about 13 when I started looking at porn, and it wasn't like somebody else introduced it to me, and it wasn't like this big issue that there was. It was just something that I stumbled onto myself and really struggled to let go of, and really like it became like a drug for me in a lot of ways when I was a young person, and I wrestled a lot with like a lot of shame and a lot of anxiety and fear and just confusion, because on the one hand I had this really secret life that nobody knew about, that I wouldn't talk about, that I would barely acknowledge to myself, and on the other hand I had this blooming, blossoming relationship with God, where I had a real desire to serve God and to see God work, and he did work, and he would speak to me and I would feel his presence. So it was really confusing to go through the goodness of God, but also like wrestle with this awful perception that I had of myself, of being such an ugly sinner, and being so disgusting to him, that I just was really polarized in my heart. And yeah, I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress about it, and to the point where like eventually it got too much for me to handle. And that kind of came around Bible college. I went to Bible college straight out of high school, and I really wanted to be a pastor, and I wanted to serve the church and work in the church, and I wanted that to be my whole life and my whole identity. But I couldn't let go of this sin in my life that I wasn't addressing, and I eventually just like poured into it so much that I just got totally crippled by fear and by pain and by shame, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do my homework. I couldn't talk to my friends. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat, and I was just a mess. And I think that porn issues are really easy to hide. It's not easy to hide alcoholism necessarily, and it's not easy to hide gambling addiction. But for this issue, it's easy to hide. So when it starts affecting your performance in other areas of your life, that's when it starts to come out. And that's when it got to the point where I had to decide, did I want people to discover my secret, or did I want to take control of that and confess myself? And God amazingly gave me the courage, gave me more strength than I had, to go to some people and talk to them and say, hey, I'm struggling and I need help. And unfortunately, at that time, I was not really ready to accept help, and I really wanted like a quick fix for my struggles, and I really wanted to just be set free and to be miraculously healed, and that didn't seem like it was going to happen. And I got really frustrated, and I got super mad at God for letting me go through all of this, and letting me struggle and not protecting me like I'd seen him protect me in other ways. So I eventually had to drop out of Bible college because of stuff connected to all of this, and I had to move back in with my parents, and I was really embarrassed, and I was frustrated because I felt like my identity that I was building for myself and the life that I envisioned for myself had completely fallen apart, and I didn't know where to go next. Like, I didn't know what kind of job I wanted to pursue. I didn't know what kind of person I wanted to be. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a Christian anymore. Like, I was just consumed by anger at myself and anger at God. And it took probably like I'm not a particularly angry person, so I think it was not too difficult for me to come out of that. And I kind of wallowed in it for a while, but I knew that eventually I'd have to let go of that anger if I wanted to continue a relationship with God. And God had been so good to me in showing himself to me that I knew he was real, and it wasn't something that I wanted to give up. So eventually I started, talking to some people, talking to some friends, and finding a safe space to express my anger and express my fear and my shame. And I started trying to just change the way I was thinking about myself. And if I had thoughts come into my head about being shameful or gross, that I would just shut those down, and I would remind myself that God didn't see me that way and I shouldn't see myself that way either. And I started taking the love of my family and the love of my friends more to heart. And so I was really fortunate that that was available to me, and that I had a lot of people who loved me and supported me, even though I wasn't ready to receive that support quite then. And I think I started to become a lot less reliant on porn as like a stress relief or an as escape. And I hadn't like cut it out of my life completely, but I had really like made it more of like a side thing rather than like a main focus of like, this is how I deal with things. It was more just like a maybe a couple times a month kind of thing. And I started working on my relationship with God. This is all like, I guess, probably 2 or 3 years ago now. And I started working on my relationship with God and allowing him to come into my heart and heal me. And I started coming to Hope Community Church, which was awesome. And I met Morgan and Michael, and they're awesome. And really gave me an opportunity to serve a church, which I found just opened my heart up to God a lot more than it had been. And I felt like more ready to receive his grace and receive his comfort and his love. And yeah, that's kind of the look of my life. Yeah.
That's a big story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of thinking back to the beginning of it. Just imagine yourself. I think you said you were 13 when you started getting involved in that, but also at the same time, you felt like your relationship with God was taking off in its own way.
Yeah.
Just kind of your early teen years. What did that feel like? What was your headspace like with these like two contrasting things happening in the same time?
Like, I think a lot of the time it didn't, like, one wouldn't feel real. And I think I still have a hard time with that too. Like, if I'm like fully invested in my relationship with God and it's like that other aspect of my life hasn't even existed, like it's so small and so insignificant compared to how much I want to serve God and how much I'm seeing him do. And on the other hand, when I'm like was in a time where I was really struggling and it was really hard, it was like, have I ever even had a relationship with God? Have I ever even heard from God? Like, things are so dark right now and things are so heavy and so painful right now. It's like, how could that love that I felt before be true? Yeah.
I think as people hear you sharing this, you can almost like take out porn if that doesn't apply to you and like put in something else. And it's so relatable to go through that despair of like, God, where are you? And then bouncing back to like, I know who God is. And like, I don't know, it's just, it is relatable.
Well, and I think the nature of being a human and being a sinner is that we all have idols that we put in the place of God. And for me, like, one of those idols happens to be porn, and I have other idols too. Like, I don't give God the credit that he deserves, and I don't give him the worship that he deserves by a long shot, because he deserves a lot. But I think, anytime you're aware that you're putting something in the place of God, that brings in a lot of shame and it brings in a lot of confusion. And I think part of the problem was, for me, like, I knew that being a Christian, this was not something that I should be doing, and I knew that it would was destructive, but I kept going back to it anyways, and I think that just added an extra layer of shame and confusion for me, and I think it just added to the complexity of everything that I was going through.
Yeah, and kind of with retrospect being like 2020, how did you see that really being, like, what impact do you see that having on your life as a early teen?
Yeah, I had a lot of self-esteem and confidence issues, especially as a young person. I've pretty much overcome that now, I think, but I had like very low opinion of myself. I didn't really think that people liked me, and if people told me that they liked me, I didn't really believe them. And it was mostly because I had this big aspect of my life that I was hiding. And so I figured nobody knew who I really was because I wasn't being honest about that. So I felt like I didn't have a lot of real friends. I felt like the people that did love me would change their mind if I was honest with them. And I was just scared constantly about my secrets being discovered. And I was like, anytime like somebody would say, "Hey, I need to talk to you," I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this is it. Like it's happening. I can't." And it would just be like, "Oh, I like have a question about the shirt you wore yesterday." Like it would just like these little things would just be so blown up in my mind because I was just plagued with fear all the time.
I think a lot of times when someone struggles with like an overwhelming sin or struggle, it's easy for that to hurt someone else without them knowing that's the cause of it and without you even realizing it. So I was just wondering if you ever had something like that happen. I don't know, maybe it doesn't resonate with you that
much. No, that's okay. I think that's a fair question. I think it comes back to one of the ways that porn dependency is different from a dependency on other things. Like if you're an alcoholic, you can see, even if you're in it and you can't see, there's ways that it affects the people around you. And because this vice is so secretive and so internal and so private, it's hard to see how it affects other people. So I think if it does, and it probably definitely did, it affected, definitely like my mental health, which I would take out on the people closest to me. So if I was overwhelmed with anxiety or depression, I would maybe like lash out at my family, and they would be on the receiving end of that on situations where it wasn't fair, or I wouldn't fully embrace friendships that maybe would have been really good for me because I was afraid. And so there's probably a lot of missed opportunity in that aspect as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. I think I was trying to like get a bigger picture of like your life as not just a single person.
Yeah. I think honestly, I think the more I go on in my life and the more I'm able to open up and share about it, I've seen it impact people, my story and my experiences in a really positive way. And that's like, that ties into stuff that we want to talk about what God has done and positive stuff, because there's been a lot of pain and a lot of heavy stuff too, but I've seen a lot of really good things happen because of the grace that God has given me and because of the ability he's given me to talk.
And shifting kind of from being early teen, you kind of discussed what was going on in your teenage years, shifting into going to college. Do you feel like some of what you described changed a fair bit and how it was playing out, or?
Yeah, I think when I went to college, like all the stuff that was going on for me as a teenager, I wasn't really aware of it. And then when I went to college, God brought all of those things to the surface. So I realized how little I thought of myself, and I realized how I didn't have a lot of friends that I felt I could trust. And I realized that I didn't really think that God loved me. And God really started to kind of reveal these things to me, which was really hard because I was realizing these things about myself that were hurtful to me, and I didn't know how to handle them. And God just started like pouring out love on me and pouring out community and friendships on me that I was just like, where is all this coming from? Like, I don't deserve this. This is so wonderful. So that was, again, like a really polarizing time because God was just loving me so much and I was just rejecting him so much with the things that I did. And that was really that was really hard because I was so aware of it too. And I knew that like what I was doing was wrong and what I was doing was not the things that God wants me to do, and that it's hurtful to me. And yet God's response to this sin was to love me more and to bless me more. And it was like, this is messing with my understanding of how the world should work. Like, what are you doing, God? You're so confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say like I know the answer to this, but would you say that God offers that to anyone struggling with something?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was really lucky that I was in a place like Bible college is just a really great place, and people are really eager to love and to serve. And it was a good place for me to be at that time. And so, like, it's hard to find that community, I think, and it's hard to find that place where people can work on behalf of God and show you that love. But it's like it's there because there are so many people like that know the love of God and want to share that because it just like spills out, and you can't hold the love of God in. And so, yeah, I think that there's nothing you can do that would make God want to hold back his love for you. And like I've thought so many times in my life, this is it, God's not going to love me after this, and it's never been true.
I think it's so cool that you've been able to see that God loves you throughout those things. I think some people can be so stubborn and just like be like, oh, that was a nice thing that happened, but something I know about you is like you acknowledge that God's given you something or blessed you.
Yeah. I definitely I go back and forth between it, and not so much now because I've had a lot of healing and I've learned a lot. But when I was younger and I was like not proactively dealing with this sin, I would be like, God loves me, I know this, and then 5 minutes later and be like, there's no possible way that God could love me, and both of those feelings felt very real, and I would just go back and forth between them constantly because my life felt so black and white and I couldn't decide where I stood.
It's kind of when you're describing how God, like, it seems like community played a really big piece in realizing God's love for you, and walking through this a bit. What have kind of been some of your experiences with walking through this in community, whether it's Christian friends, non-Christian friends?
I think whenever I was about to tell somebody my story and I would kind of anticipate what that would go like, I would always kind of think to myself, I'm going to tell them and they're going to think of me totally differently, and they're going to realize that I'm a totally different person, and they're not going to want to be my friend, or they're just going to try and coach me through my life, and they're going to be like, Hillary, you need to go see a psychologist, go now kind of thing. And none of my experiences were ever like that. I found a lot of the time telling people that I struggle has opened me up to a lot of compassion and a lot of people just trying to listen, because it's a hard thing to talk about and it's a hard thing to know how to respond to. So I think a lot of the times people just take it in. And then so that's with people who don't struggle with this. And then a lot of the times I've told people that I struggle with this, and then they will say, oh, I struggle with this too, and I've actually never told anybody that before. And now we're having a conversation about how good it feels to finally talk about it and to know that you're not alone. And I've sat and prayed with people, and then those people have contacted me a couple weeks later and said, hey, I've been able to talk to this person, or I'm doing this to seek healing in my life, or I've talked to my pastor, or I've talked to my girlfriend, or I've talked to my parents, and seeing people through God have the courage to begin the healing process and begin the re-looking at your life and recentering your life on God is really cool, and it's a huge blessing in my life.
That's an interesting aspect of it, because something I've run into is oftentimes it's a very gendered issue. There's literally a book called Every Man's Battle, and oftentimes I see this assumption that every guy deals with, but never touches you if you're not a guy, and never impacts you. If you don't mind me asking, how have you seen that play out? Just the genderism around that, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me, knowing that it was a pretty common thing for guys, but that nobody ever talked about it for girls, that just made my shame deeper, and it made me feel even more like I had no one to talk to. And so that was really hard for a long time. And then when I kind of started talking about it, and I would like talk to other girls, and they'd be like, oh, I struggle with this too, and I thought all my life that I was a freak. And I'm like, we're like realizing together that that wasn't always the case, and that like things that we believed about ourselves aren't true. And then also, like, I think people just don't really know how to talk about it. Like, I've had conversations. I went to a conference one time in Bible college, like a girls' night, and there was a speaker who came and talked about this, but she talked about it in such a clinical way of just like these are the statistics, and, you know, just like laying out the fact that girls do watch porn. And I was sitting there thinking, like, I feel so like there's so little help here. Like, I know that you're acknowledging that this is true, but there's no like acceptance of this is just a normal thing that girls go through, and it's hard, and how do you work through that? Like, it was just like, so a lot of people just like approach it as like this weird thing that needs to be talked about because nobody talks about it, and then but it's not like, it's like removing like the personhood from it, and it's like removing the people from it that actually go through it. So yeah, I think there's a whole other layer of struggle that comes with being a girl in this issue, and I think another level of isolation. And I mean, I don't know for sure because I'm not a guy, and I'm not experiencing what guys experience with this stuff, but the girls that I've talked to and myself, like, it feels very very, very lonely at times, and very like misunderstood.
Yeah. Imagine sort of just like, from what everything I've seen, I just kind of like, this is a really weird position for a guy in the Christian community, but then just how much I've heard it spoken about, where I'm like, if I was a female and this was part of my life, I couldn't imagine the whole nother level of courage it would take to even open up, and some of the assumptions and implications that seem to be associated with that. So just say like kudos, but also side note, we need to do differently as a church community.
Yes.
Obviously, the statistics make it pretty clear that this is not a guy or a girl issue. This is a human issue.
But someone needs to start that conversation, and it's hard and scary. And so, like, you offering to have this conversation in a way that opens it to whoever wants to, like, engage with this video, I think is so healthy and so needed.
Thank you.
I'm just so grateful for you to do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel very, when I left Bible college, one of the reasons that I left, and one of the reasons I was so angry at God for leaving, was I felt him kind of start to say to me that my story was something that he wanted to use, and something that he wanted to have out in the open for people to hear, and for him to do his work through. And that made me so mad, because I was like, well, I don't want to share my story. I want to bury it and act like it never happened, and I want to leave it in the past and never think about it in my future. And God was pretty adamant that that was not what he wanted for me, and I had to kind of wrestle with my anger, and then just get over my own want, and embrace that God knows best. And being able to see him do things, and being able to participate in that, is the greatest thing that I could do in my life.
Cool. Yeah. I kind of want to follow up with like a messy two-part question.
Okay.
The first part of that being just the reality of what you shared. What does life look like now in relation to that? Following God, like, I've really seen you growing with God, and see the fruit of the Spirit coming out of that, which is what evidence we have of like healthy spiritual life. And I know that this isn't something that's just an easy, oh, this was part of my life. For a lot of people, this is something that's a very deep thing that affects their life for their whole life. I just, you don't mind sharing what you're comfortable sharing about what that means for your life now, and then on the other side, how you've seen God work through this.
Yeah. It's really interesting timing, actually, this whole podcast, because I feel like these last few months for me have been probably building up to this in a weird way. And And it kind of started with, we had a youth leader conference back in like February, January. I don't remember exactly when it was. And I remember participating in the opening ceremonies and the worship and just being really impacted by God and feeling very deeply in myself that I want to serve him more. And I'm like ready to take the next step in my walk with him and my life. And that weekend, one of the speakers was talking about how, and it was very lightly touched on, talking about how porn affects teenagers, and that's something that we have to think about as youth leaders. And then I was kind of reminded, like, oh yeah, this is something that God has called me to in the past. Maybe he's calling me to that again. And so I realized, first of all, that if that's going to be something in my future, that I had to be more proactive in my life and in this struggle than I had been. I think I'd kind of reached a plateau of recovery that I'd only like healed as much as I could at that point, and I had to go deeper if I was going to get more, if that makes sense. And so I started looking for different options, and I kind of joined this community of people online that are struggling with the same thing that I do, and hearing stories about like people who struggle with this and who are in the midst of that struggle has been really powerful, and it's been heartbreaking a lot of the time because it's a really hard thing to go through, and it's a hard thing to be reminded that people go through, and also to just have that space to share my pain and then have that pain acknowledged was really weird and really exciting and really hard. And then I also created a little prayer group of friends that I could kind of go to and let them know when I'm struggling, and I could go to and say, hey, I've got this victory in my life right now, celebrate it with me. And so that group includes Morgan, and she's been great, and I've been really blessed to be able to talk to her and receive prayer for that. And then I also recently started going to counseling and talking to a counselor about this stuff, which was something that I always thought about and never quite felt that I was like personally ready to do that for a long time. And I feel like I've finally come to a place where I can do that, and it's really good. And in terms of my relationship with God, it's really weird because I feel like I really have to put in the effort and put in the work to seek him right now, and that's really hard to do in a global pandemic because I'm removed from my community, and that's super important to me, and I have no routine, and it's hard to put together time with God when my life is just a blur of eating and sleeping and watching movies.
I get that.
Yeah, it's not easy. But even just these last few days, I feel like I've seen the fruit of what God has brought me through, and I've seen like maybe even a little glimpse of where I'm going, and I'm really excited about it. And I have been super blessed to be able to talk to my family and share with them and get support from them and love. So yeah, it's really weird. God's doing a lot of healing, and God's teaching me a lot of things about myself and about what I go through, teaching me a lot of things about him. Like it's amazing to even hear like other people's stories and know for a fact that God gives them grace even though they've messed up so bad, and to see that for other people and know that it's true for myself is amazing.
Can you actually dig into what it was like to share with your family? Because I think some of the people listening are like probably like that's the biggest, fear.
Yeah, for sure. I first talked to my family about this when I was leaving Bible college, and what kind of happened was I had to drop out because I didn't have any money to pay for my classes, and I was failing my classes, and I was overwhelmed by my sin. And so I called them one day and I said, okay, here's the truth of what's going on in my life right now. I need help. And it was really hard. It was really, really, really painful. it's never fun to go to someone when you're in the midst of your mess and say, I need help. And I'm fortunate that my parents took care of the problems that they could solve for me, and invited me to be at home and stay with them. And I think I wasn't, and again, this was about 4 years ago, I wasn't ready to fully deal with my struggles, and I wasn't ready to be told that I was loved and supported. Like, I was just super angry, and that truth wasn't what I wanted to hear. So it kind of just became something that I dealt with on my own for a while, and then I moved out, and I have been working on it now. And so I think it's important to know that I have an exceptionally close relationship with my parents. Like I said earlier, we grew up on an island, so we really only had each other. So my family is a really close unit, just in general. And my parents are amazing people. They love God, and they love each other, and they love me, and that's invaluable. It's made such a difference in my life. And so I think I'm in a unique situation because I've only ever had to talk to them about it on my terms, which is so much better. I think it's easier to be told that your child is going through something like this when they're the one coming to you and saying it. And I think it's a lot less painful if you were able to take control of it and do that yourself. For me, talking to my parents has been amazing. They've been so supportive, and they've been so loving, and they've been so patient. And I don't know if that would be the case for everyone, but it's been a huge relief. It's been a really big blessing, and it's been a lot better than I probably could have ever anticipated.
So if you were talking to a parent now,
yeah,
like maybe one thing that you would say to a parent if they heard from their youth that this is going on in their life.
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, like, it's really hard to control how shocked you act in a moment, but it's not helpful to be shocked, because I think that just can add to the stress of the situation. And I know that, like, sometimes you just can't control how you react to things, but listening patiently and letting your kids say everything that they have in their head to say, because they've probably thought over that conversation a billion times and have planned out a billion times what they need to say. So just giving them the space to do that is really important. And it's always important to tell kids that they're loved, and especially by their parents and by God. Like, that's huge. Like, I have no idea where I would be in my life if I thought that God didn't love me, and if I thought my parents didn't love me. I definitely wouldn't be talking on this podcast, and I probably wouldn't be at church, or be a Christian, or be a person who's striving to experience God. It's so important. And then I think it's also important to just acknowledge, just to know that, like, just because your kid is struggling with something like this, or someone you know is struggling with something like this, doesn't mean they don't have a genuine relationship with God. It's hard to wrap your head around that, but you can really do both. You can be a deep sinner, and you can love God, and that's the difficult reality of being human, but it's so true.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Good reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking for everybody listening to this, almost anyone listening to this, I'm sure, has some friends walking through this in their own lives, and us listening to this, it's a factor in our lives. And from your experience, your perspective, having seen some things go really well, probably having seen this process go badly at times, what advice would you have particularly for youth and that may be experiencing this personally, or may have a friend mention it to them, or they become aware of it?
I think that kind of the recovery of dealing with an issue like this, and dealing with an addiction like this, looks really different for everyone, and there's no roadmap for that. But some things that have been key points for my journey, and I know have been key points for the journeys of other people that I've talked to. The first, talking to someone initially is huge, and I think once you go to someone and tell them that you struggle, everything just gets a little bit easier after that. And the first person I told was a friend of mine from high school when I was probably 14 at that time, and it was a huge relief to not be carrying and burdened with a secret anymore. And on the one hand, she wasn't a Christian, so she couldn't really help me, and she was a teenager too, and she couldn't really help me in the way that I probably needed. But talking to that first person allowed me to feel more comfortable, eventually to talk to other people, and then eventually to talk to people who did have the tools to help me. So I think, like, if this is something that you're struggling with, like, it's awful, it's not fun, but it's so necessary, and it's definitely not as bad as you probably think it would be to just tell somebody this is this is what you struggle with, and you can tell me that. I can be that person for you, and I would be really happy to do that because I know what it's like to be in that position, and I have a lot of grace and a lot of love for people who are going through what I go through. And then I think it's important to know that you're not weird, and you're not wrong, and there's nothing wrong with you. You're a normal person who sins and struggles, and that's great. It's great to just be a normal person. And I think, like, for a lot of my life, I didn't know that, and I didn't believe that, and I was really unkind to myself. So I think it's really important to just be kind to yourself, and to acknowledge that people love you, and to acknowledge that God loves you, and those things can't be taken away by what you do. Yeah, I think that's the most important things.
Cool. Yeah, is there anything that you feel like that we may have skipped over that you'd like to add in here, or anything that you think may be valuable?
Yeah, I think that I just want to say that I think my God's plan for my life is to be someone that he can talk through to people who struggle with this. And so if you're listening or watching and you are someone who struggles with this, like, my contact information is going to be available through this video, and you can reach out to me, and I would really love to hear from you. And if you have a friend that's struggling with this, or a kid, and you want to know how to walk with them in a way that's valuable and meaningful for them, then I can have a conversation with you about that, and we can talk about that. And I mean, for everybody, not just people who struggle with this, or people who struggle with this maybe even deeper than I have. Like, God loves you so much, and it's hard to wrap your head around that when you maybe dislike yourself so much and struggle with your identity of yourself so much, but it's so true, and it's so real, and there's nothing you can do to change that. And he forgives you. Like, I just think about, like, heaven is full of sinners. Heaven is full of people who messed up, and heaven is full of people who were bad. And that's the way God wants it. He wants to show his mercy, and he wants to show his forgiveness. And you just have to let him do that. You have to let him forgive you, and you can't do that if you haven't messed up. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, really, really well put.
Thanks.
If you're listening to this podcast, there's one section that you should really listen to. I think it's that. I'm just going to say it right now. Because when you start to understand that and come to really know that, then there starts to be hope, and there starts to be an opportunity for change.
Yeah.
The work, I believe. That's really big. One random thing, as we were talking beforehand on this podcast.
Okay.
We were talking about Bible college. Actually,
Yes.
3 of us here have gone to 2 different Bible colleges. I met Morgan at Bible college, but did date her then. Big mistake. Or God worked in mysterious ways.
Just to clarify, Michael's saying the mistake was that he didn't date me sooner, but we think the timing.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it was not a mistake to date Morgan.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been affirmed is the best choices of my life was to date Morgan.
Aww.
But Bible college, we were talking about how great it is, and that's something that we should actually share about with our youth. So I'll let you give it a bit of spiel. I'm gonna
sure.
be honest,
Even though Bible college was a super weird time for me and it was really hard, it was also like one of the best times in my life. I think overall I was like, I had the most joy, and I made some amazing friends, and I really learned a lot about who God is and what it means to know God. And it was cool because there were lots of different kinds of people at Bible college. There were people who wanted to be pastors, and there were people who wanted to be musicians, and there were people who were like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to be a paramedic, or I've been like working in business for 5 years, but I really kind of feel like I need to know who God is. And so it was just really cool. I learned a lot, and I think I had a lot of fun. We would play like board games, and we'd have blanket forts and like all the like typical things that you hear about happening in college that like you're like, oh, that can't be true. No, we built like a huge blanket fort and like had popcorn and watched movies in it, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that just knowing and studying theology a little bit is sometimes something that is hard to find at church or hard to access in youth group. And there's just like a slightly deeper level of information and things that you can learn at Bible college that can really help you understand who God is in a deeper way and help you understand who you are in a deeper way. And I would 10 out of 10 recommend that to anybody who's heading out of high school and wondering what to do next. Lots of Bible colleges have like a 1-year program. You can just go and experience the basic level of classes and have a great time, and then move on to other things in your life that are exciting. And yeah.
I think the one thing that stands out to me is that like 1-year program idea. I remember right after high school, I had a moment of like, okay, if I strongly believe in God and want to serve him, I want to know enough about him that I can make it through this next like young adulthood time that's going to be, I knew ahead of time it was going to be hard. And so that's kind of why I chose to go, but I ended up staying and finding a career, like sort of education through that. But you could just do a year and find yourself more cemented in knowing why you believe what you believe. So that was big for me.
Yeah.
And a 2-second message, something that's been like really big in what I've been seeing and hearing lately that I think God's speaking to me through is just the importance of acknowledging that females can go to Bible college and females can be in ministry and females can, that not just they can, but they should. And like, if you feel like people are speaking over you that you have gifts from God to do certain things, don't diminish those because of gender. And I think like maybe here in the Lower Mainland or our church, it's more accepted, but in some places it's not. So yeah, that's my little, I'll get off my soapbox now. But
I'll see if I can touch on that and circle us back in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Women in ministry, I think there's a massive need for that. The more I'm in ministry as a very stereotypical white guy, the more I realize just the massive need for everyone. God created all this very differently, and every church has very different people that need to be served by very different people. And like me as a male in ministry, one of the things that I have to do just to bring balance is to really go, my female youth leaders carry a lot of the pastoral work that I would typically do, but I can't do because I'm a male and our youth need to connect with females. And so the more we have females who say, hey, God's gifted me, he's given me a passion and calling, I'm going to pursue that and serve in the church, even though it's hard oftentimes. There's weird difficult situations we run into just because of expectations around gender, it really brings balance and strength. Yeah, because honestly, Morgan and Hillary carry a lot of pastoral weight in our ministry because there's that need for it. If there was a female youth pastor in my role, then we'd be leaning more on guys. But oftentimes in churches, there is no option but a bunch of guys, and that's not great. So definitely, if you see God calling, working in your life, please pursue that, and don't see gender as something as a weakness, but as a strength that God's called us to. And on Bible college, I'd echo what they've all said. And particularly, I found it interesting in Hillary's story, just how she mentioned how this community of people really clearly demonstrating God's love for her, how transformative that was. In my experience in Bible college, that was radically transforming healing for me. Just the reality of a life stage, stepping out of high school into university. There's a lot of realization you have, and there's a lot of angst that you have, and it's just a time where stuff hits the fan. And being able to do that in a community where we're passionately following God together and you're able to have people clearly communicate who God is through their own character is really valuable. It's a place that you don't necessarily need to stay in forever, but for a time in life, it can be really valuable. So particularly those one-year programs, there's ones focused on a lot of things other than just theology. I did intercultural studies, which has been pretty cool and found uniquely valuable. Yeah, so by all means, it can be a really, really valuable thing for your life, and a place where God can do a lot of work in a weird. When there's change, that's oftentimes where God does a lot of work. And when you're stepping out of high school into university, that's a big change. One of the biggest changes in your life, and having that be in a context where you're really able to have a lot of people from the church and the body of Christ speak into it, so valuable. Anything else you want to sneak in there, Hillary?
No, I'll just say that I totally agree with you. And lots of women go to Bible college. I think my Bible college probably had slightly more women than men attending programs. And don't let that be the reason you hold back in what God could be calling you to or what He could be offering for you, because He created people, and He loves all people, and He works through all people. And that's really cool. That's awesome.
Thanks. And thank you so much, Hillary, for
Yeah.
on this and taking a massive step in vulnerability. Yeah, so thankful for that. You have a story that's so valuable to hear. I'm so thankful that you're willing to share that and be available to those that may reach out to you. Thank you, Morgan, for being on this and taking the time and talking through this. It's been really cool to see just the interview. Yeah, just all this come together.
Here's our puppy.
Here's Stark.
Hey, there's the puppy that
Thank you, Stark.
Chewing on a bone in the background. And as we close up, I want to say a couple things. I just want to acknowledge that, Hillary's story is unique to her, but there's a lot of parallels for a lot of other people. My own life, as she shared her story, there's a lot of parallels I've seen of my own experiences with similar things. And it's something we need to talk about. We need to be real about. The feeling I've seen in my life has come from people saying, God loves us. We know we're broken. We need to talk about this and work through this and look for hope. Look for healing and realize something that Hillary and I talked a bit beforehand. Healing isn't necessarily always this was a thing for a time in my life and now I'm free forever. Oftentimes healing is there's different struggles in everybody's life that start to play a really big role, and seeking healing is seeking sobriety and seeking pursuing God and loving God more than that, knowing that it may be something that is a factor in your life for the rest of your life. And having that humility of that is, I think, really key to setting an honest hope forward for ourselves, for our friends and our church community. Hope is God is working to make us more like Him and shape our desires to be more like Him. But in our time on earth, we're not going to be perfected. I'm going to throw that out there. I'm going to put some links to some of my favorite resources on this topic in the show notes. So if you're on YouTube, it'll just be in the description. And I'm also going to put some Instagram links for Hillary and myself in the show notes. So you guys can reach out to us if you want. We'd love to connect with you if this is something that resonates
You can
with
put mine too.
Okay, and we'll put Morgan's in there too. So yeah, there's a way that you guys can reach out to all of us. If you don't have Instagram, my email's on the church website and it's around, and I'll get you connected to whoever you want to get connected to. And also, we have an incredible team of youth leaders. Knowing them closely, a lot of them have had different experiences with similar things and have walked with God through that, and they're so happy to talk to you about that and encourage you. If there's something you're thinking about opening up with, like say your parents about, that's incredibly hard and difficult, and it can oftentimes be easier to open up with somebody who's a little less scary first and get some coaching. And so feel free to reach out to one of your youth leaders, get a little bit of coaching, walk through that, and we can hopefully give you a bit of guidance on how to step into that, because the hardest relationships are the best, but they're also the hardest. And when things go wrong, it hurts the most. I think that covers everything. Last check, anything you guys need to add?
I would just say that you can also just reach out to us if you want us to pray, just to pray for you, or you don't have to share details, but just pray for me. That's all you need to say, and that will be taken care of.
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue. I'm going to close up this podcast in prayer, and then we'll sign off.
Okay.
Lord, we come before you. This is one of those things that's one of the biggest factors in being a Christian in our current culture. And it shapes our lives, our families, our friendships. And it's been something that we've tended to avoid. We're trying to honor you with this and opening this up and making this a bit of a conversation, talk about how you work in our stories. I pray that you would use what we've shared well. If there's anything that we've shared that might have been misguiding, that you would prevent that from taking anybody down the wrong path. And that for those of us that really relate to this, that you would give us courage, that we would feel your deep love, that nothing can separate us from your love, neither height nor depth, nor angels nor principalities, nor pornography, nor lust, nor anything else that pulls us away from you can separate us from your love. I pray that we would know that and feel that, and that you would be working in our lives. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, it's been great. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Morgan.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye, guys. And just know that because we're in quarantine, even if you don't want to reach out about this topic, you can reach out, and we have the time. So you can send us an email if you want to, whatever you want. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
All right. See you guys.